Welcome to Black and Psych, and thank you for coming to our event today. Who is Black and Psych? Black and Psych is a platform to promote visibility, community, and networking opportunities between Black professionals and trainees across the field of psychology. We seek to celebrate, amplify, and support Black voices in psychology and to encourage dialogue around the intersections of psychology, race, social justice, and equity. What we are here for. The Black and Psych organization is founded to one, promote the visibility of Black professionals and trainees in the field of psychology, two, create a community and network of established and aspiring Black psychologists for connection and future collaboration, and three, encourage and hold a space for dialogue around the intersections of psychology, race, social justice, and equity. Who we are here for. Black and Psych is founded to promote visibility, community, and networking opportunities between Black professionals and trainees across the field of psychology, inclusive of all intersectional identities. This is Black and Psych's current team, and you're currently hearing from the current president, Lauren Kendall Brooks. If you're interested in joining our team, please send an email to blackandspsych@gmail.com, visit our website at blackandspsych.org, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram. Also, the QR code listed on the right side of your screen will also take you directly to our website. Thank you, and I hope you would really enjoy today's seminar.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Roche Hidalgo. I'm one of the co-founders for the Black and Psych organization, and we're very, very happy to have Kara with us to launch this nice data viz summer series. We're going to be covering a lot about data visualizations from different aspects. Kara is going to be talking about like these general rules, tips, and tricks that you can incorporate in your data visualization journey. In July, we're going to have a little bit more concentration in a specific tool, R, looking an introduction to data visualization in R. And then in August, we're going to have another talk, but this time focusing on SPSS and incorporating data visualization and meta-analysis. But I'm very, very happy to have Kara once again with us. This is the first time with Black and Psych, but I worked with Kara before, and I'm super, super excited to get to share all of the knowledge that she already shared with me, with all of you. So I just want to introduce you to this wonderful data scientist and visualization engineer, designer. It's amazing, Kara. Welcome.
Thank you very much. That's quite the introduction. I'll do my best to live up to it. Thanks everyone for having me. It's a real privilege to be here with you all. I was really excited about this when Jocelyn got in touch, and it's just been so good to think about my materials with a slightly different angle. Those of you who've seen me do talks before, I normally have an emphasis on the code behind how to produce the plots. And this time what we're doing is kind of a whistle-stop tour of the principles that I apply, and I apply them in code using R, but these principles are ones that you can apply regardless of the tool that you're using. And so it was really fun trying to figure out, okay, how can I extract that and make this into a session that anyone can get something from regardless of the tools that you're using. Jocelyn's going to be keeping an eye on the chat because I'll struggle to keep an eye on my slides and the chat and everything else. So if there's a question that you've got, please post it in there, and either I'll see it, or if I don't see it, then Jocelyn can interrupt me. And that's a dynamic that we have agreed in advance of the talk. So that would be great. Okay, without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen, and we can get cracking with what we're going to be covering today. So I've titled today Ready, Steady, Viz, and it's about tips, tricks, and no-code solutions for creating visualizations that are going to stand out, that are going to be memorable, intuitive for your audience, and that you can be really proud of, that will showcase the hard work that you've done collecting the data, doing the analysis, extracting the story, and yeah, just contributing to academia or science or whatever sector you're in, with some graphs that people will continue talking about after you've presented them. So as I said, real privilege to be here. Those of you who've not met me before, I'm Cara Thompson, and I'm a data visualization consultant. And the way that I ended up here was growing up with a love for patterns in music and in language. So my family is a musical family, and we grew up in France, but spoke English at home. And so I've just always been fascinated with how the human brain deals with all of that. It's just noise, but somehow it makes sense. And sometimes it's beautiful, and sometimes it's not. And what makes that happen? So I went from that to, I managed to take all of that into a PhD in psychology, where I used the ERP method to put electrodes on people's brains, saw how the brains were, not on the brains directly, obviously, just on on their heads, and saw how the brains were reacting to unexpected patterns in music and language. Really enjoyed that. It was really good fun, and I got to play people weird sentences and music that didn't make sense, and some music that did make sense, and it was a fun thing to try and prove some of the theories that have been kicking around about what makes music enjoyable, what makes poetry enjoyable. From there, I took the statistics and went into the world of postgrad medical exams. And those of you who've interacted with surgeons before will know that surgeons do not like not understanding things. They're used to being top of the class. And so when something comes up that they don't understand, they find it quite frustrating, and understandably so. And I kind of discovered that data visualization was a really great shortcut in helping them see the main patterns in the data, so that then they could ask informed questions about what was going on. So that was good fun. And then after a decade of doing that, I decided to go independent as a data viz consultant to bring this to other organizations. And the thing that drives me in all of this is helping other people maximize the impact of their expertise. So you know, between all of you here, you have so much expertise in your own fields. There's so much stuff that you know that I have no knowledge of whatsoever. And it just breaks my heart when somebody has all this amassed expertise is spending, 5 or 6 hours in Excel trying to get something to look nice, and feeling frustrated with that when your time could be used in so many better ways. So what I'm trying to do is maximize the impact of your expertise, both in terms of saving you time in getting from your data to a visualization that you're happy with, but also maximize the impact that it's going to make in other people being able to see it, being able to remember the story, and being excited about the things that you've been discovering. Since we're still in the introductions, I also have 2 young daughters who were born kind of during the pandemic, really, and as it was closing, and so they keep me on my toes with stuff outside of data viz. How did I end up here? Well, part of it was actually during my time on maternity leave, thinking, right, I need to keep my brain ticking with data viz stuff and data things. And I discovered the Tidy Tuesday community on Twitter. Now, Twitter is a different place now from what it was 4 or 5 years ago. But that meant that I spent my time creating graphs in which it's very difficult to, it's difficult to put your foot in it. These are graphs which are based on data which is typically not, political, not controversial. And I just found really great enjoyment in making visualizations that were, at times quite silly, but at other times where the focus was on the aesthetics and on telling stories. So here we've got the one that I hope, to me anyway, looks a bit like a galaxy, and tells the stories of astronauts going into space and what age they were when they went on their first mission. And we can highlight this guy here, John Herschel Glenn, who was probably the oldest astronaut to have gone on a mission. He'd been several times before then, but this is not a typo or an error. This guy is a legend. So it was quite fun thinking about things that go over time, and then trying to highlight the stories of different people groups. And here we're talking about hired workers and other climbers on Everest. And the sad stories that there are to tell within that context as well. And then I looked at things and how they've evolved over time. So here we've got the evolution of colour in Lego bricks, and you can kind of see that it was stagnating because everybody already had all the colours at this point, and then they thought we need to make people buy more things, and so they branched out, and you get the girly colours kind of coming in here with the turquoise and the pink, but also the kind of storyline stuff with the alien species and with the orange and the green stuff as well. So it's just interesting kind of mapping these things. This example here, the last one, is one that I created kind of reflecting on the pandemic. My family, as I mentioned, is in France. We're in the UK. And we'd always taken comfort in the fact that we were just a flight away from each other. And suddenly during the pandemic, that all came to a stop. And so that kind of sinking feeling of the flight path and the plane that suddenly, you kind of lose your footing a little bit. And so it was trying to help us reflect on that, taking data, turning it into a story, and trying to communicate something meaningful to people looking. So those are probably not graphs that you would want to use in an academic publication. However, doing this taught me how to manipulate pretty much everything that is in a graph to help it tell a story in a way that is engaging, in a way that makes the most of text, of colour, of placements, etc. And so that's kind of what we're focusing on today. It's how do we capture the good of all of that and turn it into plots that people actually want to look at. And part of what I do is create solutions for people. So here is an example of what one of the packages that I make for clients does, that takes basic plots in R, adds 2 lines of code and makes them look already much better and ready to go. And the other thing that I really enjoy doing is training and consulting. So people have got projects going on, they want a bit of help on getting the visualizations into shape. I really enjoy doing that and spending time with groups like this where people are keen to increase their skills and to take things into their own workplaces is a really rewarding thing for me to do. So thank you so much for the opportunity to do this this evening, and I really hope, well, it's the evening for me, it's lunchtime for most of you. But anyway, I really hope that you take something from this that will help you when it comes to data viz. So that's me. How did we end up here? We ended up here because of this person. So this is Jocelyn, and Jocelyn got in touch probably a month or 2 ago to say, hey, I'm doing this summer series and I would love for you to come and talk. And it was already a yes from me. Jocelyn and I had worked together on a project for IVAC a couple of summers ago through R for the Rest of Us, where we were both kind of contracting for David Kais. And yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed the process of working with her, of working with an organization who had some data about vaccine access, and figuring out how do we create visualizations that are going to be intuitive for people to understand, but that are also going to be memorable, and that are going to make people want to read the plots and read the reports of what could otherwise be quite dry sets of tables and bar graphs, etc. So it's trying to figure out how do we do this together, and I really enjoyed the process of working with Jocelyn. So if you've not worked with Jocelyn and you're thinking of working with Jocelyn, highly recommend. That was a good process. So where do we go from here? We've got 2 hours together, and I'm going to share with you 12 different resources to help with crafting good color palettes, choosing the right type of visualization, and optimizing the text that you're using. So those of you who are good at maths will figure out that that's 1 resource every 10 minutes. They're not going to land at 10-minute intervals, but that's the average. And so if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I already know this, then there'll be something coming up, hopefully, that will be good for you. And as we said at the start, these are no-code solutions. So it's a mix of sources of inspiration and kind of practical tools to help you. And it's all about enhancing what you're already doing. So I'm not going to suggest that you buy any extra software or that you learn anything totally different from what you've got. And the ultimate aim is to speed up the process of getting from your data to a publishable visualization. So that's the goal. To get the most out of the session, I'm going to recommend that you keep in your mind a graph that you're making or a research question for which you've gathered some data. Maybe grab a pen and some paper and draw things. If you see something and think, oh, actually, that's quite an interesting way of presenting that, try and draw it, annotate things with ideas, maybe thoughts about the colors that you might be using, what the main story is, etc., etc. So that by the end of this session, you've kind of got something that you can go away with that you can continue working on. It will be fast. There's a lot that we're going to cover, but it will also be recorded. So do not panic if you think you've missed something. You can revisit. And if you get stuck on anything that I've recommended, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help. The resources that I'm sharing are going to be highlighted with slides that look like this. So the dark blue background, and then they're going to be numbered as well. So again, if you're just working through this again, on replay and you want to just scroll along the replay bar, you can see where the dark blue slides are. And I will also pop a list of all of the resources on the talks page of my website. So if at any point you start to feel like this slightly terrified squirrel, that you've jumped onto a workshop, it's all going too quickly and you're about to fall off, do not worry. You can revisit stuff if you need to. It's absolutely fine. So the first thing we're talking about is creating colours for compelling visualizations. The aim here is to choose colours which will make your data viz memorable and intuitive without compromising on accessibility. And it's definitely possible to do that. And so the aim here is to share some tools and some tips for doing that. We'll explore the notion of colour symbolism. We'll establish a bit of terminology so that we're all talking about the same thing. And then I'll share some tips and tricks for choosing your colours. We'll explore the accessibility guidelines and some resources around that so that you can make sure you're getting this right for everybody. So what do I mean by intuitive colour palettes? Now, since this is Black and Psych, I thought I would throw in a bit of psychology trivia. That a lot of you will probably have come across this before. Which one is Booba and which one is Kiki? There's a fairly wide international consensus that Kiki is the spiky one. Can anyone name the original authors of this paper? I'm going to open up the chat so that I can see if anyone is feeling brave and has a good memory of their undergrad psych days when they were looking into this. So far, just crickets in the chat. Oh, Justin's typing. I'm excited to see what comes out. No, maybe not. No, that's fine. I'll give you all the answer. So the answer to this is Wolfgang Köhler, of course. Back in 1929, came up with this notion of sound symbolism, and people are still looking into it today. So people are still trying to figure out what drives this, and it seems to be tied to sound properties. Things have taken on lots of different shapes, lots of variants on the rounded shape, variants on the spiky shape, and the consensus is still the same, that we associate visual stimuli with sound stimuli. So we think that we know what things sound like, even if they're completely made up. It's a fun experiment, and my goal is to try and see, can we do this with colours? So can we use colours in our visualizations that help us tell the story without really having to say very much? We're going to play a quick game, and I'm going to ask you to suspend all disbelief and follow me on an adventure with the Palmer penguins, who decided to run a baking competition. So the Palmer penguins had the Great Penguin Bake Off, and the species were all different. They were given the task of creating the best banana loaf. So the best banana bread that they could come up with, and we're going to have a rating, arbitrarily along the y-axis of the taller the bar, the yummier the cake was. And each species was given a banana type to use with different levels of ripeness. So my first question for you in the chat, fingers on the buzzers please, is which penguin species was given the overripe bananas? Was it A, Adelie, B, chinstrap, or C, gentoo? C, gentoo. Yes, great, good. That makes sense. Everybody's on board. So they then, within the Adelies, they were given the underripe bananas. So those are the green ones. And they were allowed to choose a different quantity depending on which island they lived in. So a different density of underripe bananas. So which of the islands decided to go for, the maximum impact of green bananas in their banana bread? Was it A, Bisco, B, Dream, or C, Torgerson? A. Yep, excellent. So the more intense the green, the more we assume that they put green bananas in. And then they decided to go on a retreat in different locations to plan their bakes. And so some of them went on a ski resort, some of them went to the lovely English countryside, and some of them went to city centre Paris. Which species went to Paris? Was it Adelie, chinstrap, or gentoo? Yeah, exactly. It's great. No legends anywhere, but you're understanding what's going on. Ooh, controversial. See, I guess blue could be associated with France as well. But I was thinking blue was more for the ski resort and the colour of the snow. So yeah, the A is the consensus here of that kind of city centre grey. Now we're really testing your knowledge of the UK version of the Bake Off here, but they were allowed to invite a different mentor to come along with them. So you've got Prue, you've got Mary Berry, and you've got Paul. Which species decided to invite Prue Leaf to come with them on the Great British Bake Off retreat? Oh, C. Okay, so Prue Leaf here, B. Yes, excellent, excellent. We've got a B coming up. So Juliet, well done as well. So B is, yeah, Prue is the really colourful, like she just wears really, really colourful stuff all the time. So she's the mentor here. I guess this is a question of knowing your audience, but you get the idea, right? You can tell a story with your colours without really having to say very much else. Last thing, they were allowed to choose a snack that they could take with them between bakes. And some of them chose fish and chips, some of them chose sardines, and some of them chose sushi. Which species chose to have sushi for their snacks? Yeah, it was B. Yeah, great stuff. Okay, so hit or miss, and it's not about turning your visualizations into a guessing game, but hopefully this slightly goofy game of Penguin Bake Off will have shown you how much you can do with color without really having to do very much else. In terms of real data, I mean, here obviously it's not real data, it's still data that I've pretended is about baking. What it does is it helps you very quickly see the story. And so here we know that the underripe bananas are not yummy. That's not the way to go if you want to bake banana bread. Do not bake it with green bananas. Whereas the overripe bananas and the other ones, the normal, the appropriately ripe bananas, I guess, they were the ones that achieved the yummiest cake. And people remember that, you do this at the start of the talk, you come back to it at the end, you don't show the graph, you just say which banana should you not bake with, and everybody remembers where the green was in the graph. With actual data, you can do it as well. So this is about the ratings of Avatar: The Last Airbender series. Don't know if anyone has watched that, but anyway, here you've got fire, you've got earth, and you've got water. And once you've clocked that fire is the orange one, then it's quite easy to follow it around the rest of the information that's going on in the visual. And same, water's blue, again, makes it quite easy to process what's going on there. Again, coming back to the bake-off stuff, if I were to ask you here, which bake ingredient is the second one, you can do that. But if I ask you here, which is the second one, it's much easier to see that it's raspberries, and it's much more memorable if you come back to it later. Whereas if you're doing this, you kind of have to think a little bit more about what the colours mean. So this is obviously very literal, and I'm not suggesting that you're creating graphs that have necessarily such a literal interpretation, but it's just to show the ways in which colours can help us in our visualizations to communicate stuff with a bit less effort. This was taken from the Guardian website a few weeks ago when we had our local elections, and it was very quick for anyone in the UK to see who was having a bad time and who was having a good time in terms of the election outcomes. But this also highlights something that colours are culturally dependent as well. So be mindful of the colour associations within the culture of the audience that you're presenting your visualizations for, in that the American political spectrum, the colours are the other way around to the colours that we use here. So it's interesting to see how easy it is to use colours to communicate, but also we need to just be mindful of how they would be interpreted by different groups. So hopefully that's convinced you somewhat that colours are worth paying attention to, that they're not just about making the visualizations pretty, they're about making them effective communication tools. They're about making your story memorable, because we can now all remember which bananas we're not supposed to bake with. And you can probably also remember which ingredient was second in the baking choices in the bar graph that I showed you. So we've kind of got these, colours are a great shortcut to making things stick, and to making our story easier for people to process. So how do we go about choosing them? Because it's all very well and good to say choose your colours wisely. It's not always easy. So it's about making things easier to remember. It's not about making your visualizations into a guessing game. I don't really recommend getting rid of the legend to the extent that I did there with the Penguin Bake Off. It's about making sure that once you've seen the legend, then you don't have to kind of keep going back to the legend to remind you what's what, then going back to the plot, by the time you've traveled back and tried to figure out which one it is, you're, oh, wait a minute, what was it again? Going back to the legend. Oh, wait a minute, what was the pattern that I was looking at? And it adds a cognitive load that is unnecessary. And it's already difficult enough trying to make sense of somebody else's data and visualizations. What we need to do is make it as easy as possible. And so using colours well is a huge part of that. But it's hard. So we need to let other people help us to do this. And there are things that we can do to that. So you may be in a fortunate position to be in a team or a department or an organization that has really well thought out brand guidelines. Great, if that's the case, make the most of those. But I wouldn't recommend just using your brand colors in the visualizations because they might not necessarily map onto the semantics that you want to be conveying. And I'll talk a little bit in a bit about how we can make any color work with your brand guideline colors. But this is a situation where I found it's sometimes better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission from the marketing department, because they will be very tied to the colors that are there and they won't necessarily see how you can kind of build on them to create different ones in the visualizations that you're going to be using. But if you have brand guidelines, absolutely consult them and try and make the most of them. The one thing that I would highlight with using your brand is if you have a logo that has one strong color, say your logo is mostly green. If you're creating visualizations about, say, different people groups, and you make one group the green color, you're in danger of kind of highlighting them as the group that counts or the important group or whatever. So just make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences in the way that you're using colors to map to different groups if you're basing them on the strong logo color that you have. The next thing that you can use is a photo and then something like imagecolorpicker.com to pick out colors, which is what I did here for these visualizations. So let me just copy that image here because we'll reuse it in just a bit. So what I did, here you see, there we go, there's Prue's colourful jacket that I was talking about earlier. Mary Berry has the softer colours, and Paul, was very grey with the blue eyes. And here we've got the different locations that they were in, the different snacks that they had, etc. So I find if you're starting from a photo where you enjoy the composition and the combination of colours, that's probably quite a good starting point for extracting colours that are going to work well together in a visualization. So this is the first resource that I'm sharing with you. Imagecolorpicker.com is the one that I use. There are a bunch of different tools that I'm sure you can use to do that. But just to show you how it works, we will accept the cookies. You can then say use your image, and then you can paste in an image that you've just copied from somewhere. And then what it allows you to do is click on different bits of the image, and then you can extract the hex codes over here and bring them in to what you need. Or maybe you're working with RGBs and that's easier for you. That's fine. So yeah, it's quite a useful tool that I use a lot. And let's just find that lovely bright pink that we had earlier. Yeah, a good way to go about finding colours if you know you've got an image that's relevant and you want to extract something from that. So there we go, resource number one. Those of you who are counting the minutes, do not worry, we will cover more of them as time speeds up. It's not necessarily always literal though, and we talked about that you're probably not creating plots about baking ingredients. This is a project in which I took a more kind of metaphorical approach to it. It was for a project in British Columbia where they were looking to introduce a new system that was going to replace the old system. And it had two different users who were going to be involved in using it. So I started from this photo, which is from a mountain in British Columbia. And I decided that I would put the old system in the kind of purpley shadows, and the new system would be the kind of green growth and the promise of hope for the future. And then some of the users were kind of basically administrators for the organizations. And I wanted them to have the mountaintop because they were the ones that were going to have the overarching view of the whole thing. So they were the golden hues. And then we've got the lake that I used, which also mapped quite nicely to the logo of the main users who were not the administrators, but the people benefiting from it as well. So just an example of a less literal approach to to finding colors that are going to work for your visualizations. You can take inspiration from photos or other data viz or art that you like. I quite like hanging out in art galleries when I find the time to do that. It's always interesting seeing how other people are using colors. This one is another bake, not that I'm obsessed with the bake-off. This is another bake-off related graph in which you can see the progression of the candidates through the series. All of the colors are taken from this photo and actually mostly from Proust's shirt. And so it was a kind of, well, you know, a designer has gone to the trouble of making a shirt that looks pretty great in terms of the color combinations. Why not honor that and make the most of that? And also you've got bits of the tent, I think, going into the background. I think I actually did use the color of the frosting to go for some of the transparency thing here. And this is just it's a nice, happy photo. And I thought, let's reuse some of the good colors that are there. Google Images is quite a fun resource, and you can Google, whatever you like. Palette. I'm based in Edinburgh, so I try to Google the Edinburgh color palette, and this is what it suggests. It comes out here. The blue here corresponds to the festival. The red is for the Forth Road Bridge, and I can't quite remember what all the others are, but you can give it a try. Sunflower palette or peacock palette or whatever it is that you want to work with. You can find palettes that do that. We've got a question in the chat about examples of how to use color in a way that respects and acknowledges the diversity among different racial or ethnic groups. I guess it depends whether you mean you're creating a visualization in which you want to represent different racial and ethnic groups and you need to find colors that are appropriate for each of them, or if you're meaning differences in cultural perception of color. For the former, I would say just try to avoid obvious unhelpful stereotypes when you're creating color palettes that are to do with that. I don't really know. Try to think of colors that are neutral in value, but that highlight. If you're talking about diversity, make it fun to look at. We're all enriched from living in a world where people are different from each other, and so it's partly about acknowledging that and making it fun. But it's also that thing I talked about earlier about don't make your logo color. Say the white group. Don't make your logo color the group that you're representing in one way, because that can have impact on how the other groups are perceived. I would say avoid using your logo color if you're trying to assign colors to different groups in a visualization. I hope that helps answer your question. Great, thank you very much. Yeah, just in a sense, it's be respectful of people and sensible and trust your gut. I think we could try and come up with rules for every situation, but I think sometimes it comes down to being a decent person and trying to do something that's going to work for everyone. Come back to me if that's not helpful. So the other thing that you can do is start from the color wheel and read around how to use it. And using a tool like Peloton is really helpful. So again, here we go, resource number 2, Peloton. Let's just open that up and you can see what it does. So again, we shall accept the cookies. So what this does is it gives you a color wheel that you can manipulate. And you can say, actually, I need 3 colors. So you can tell it you need 3 colors that are kind of similar to each other, 3 colors that are quite distinct from each other. And when I first started out thinking about colors, I thought, okay, the best way to do this is to maximize the distance between all of them, right? So you end up with colors that are like 90 degrees away from each other. Actually, let's do that again. Oops. Yeah. So maximum distance between them, and that will work really well, and it will make sure that they're all quite different. The trouble with that is that you end up with something that looks a little bit like a primary school logo, which isn't necessarily the aesthetic that you're going for. Instead, the recommended default that Peloton suggests when you start out is to have 30 degrees between the colors. So you can play around with that. Here we've only got 3. If we do it with 4, again, if the colors are slightly closer together, it just makes it look a lot more sophisticated somehow. It's just, it looks more carefully put together than if you go for the maximum separation between the colors. and then you end up with something that's a little bit, yeah, just two primary colors. So you've got you've got different color tools that you can use, and Peloton is one that I recommend. You can also then have some simulations of different types of color blindness, which help you see what your colors will look like to people who perceive color slightly differently. And you can also just extract the color codes there by clicking on them, and it copies them. So again, another useful no-code resource for your Viz colors there. Yeah, Adam in the chat has suggested using pictures of objects representing different groups. That can be a really good starting point. Or if you know you've got kind of strong cultural associations between different types of art and different groups, then that can be quite a useful way of both celebrating the cultural differences that are there and making your visualizations stick. So yeah, good suggestion. One thing that I recommend people do when they're thinking about colors is try to type the main message that you're wanting to communicate on a background of the color that you're interested in. So I was working with a group who had come up with like a traffic light color scheme for a table. They wanted to show that, the positive stuff is green, the stuff in the middle is amber, and the stuff that's bad is red. And they were using this green color, which is like the default CSS green, and it's just not nice to look at. And to me, this green does not communicate relax, all is well. And to me, this is a kind of alarm of some sort. So instead, in working with them, I suggested actually let's go for like a sage, relaxing, lighter green color. And that to me is much more relaxing to look at. So that's to me is more convincing as a color that says it's okay, all is well. And then you can do some stuff with the text as well to help emphasize the message. And again, well done with this bright green. This is a great value to be celebrating. Again, it's a bit aggressive. So I thought, maybe a bolder, darker sage would work quite well. And then you need to make sure that you change the contrast of your text, which I'll share with you in a bit. But just have a think about it in your own visualizations. What do the colors represent? And what happens when you write the words that the color represents on the background of that color? It's quite a useful test just to see if you have a gut reaction of like, oh no, that doesn't work, or oh yeah, that makes sense. Worth trying. Resource number 3 is a blog post by Lisa on the Data Wrapper website, and it's amazing. It's one of the most thorough blog posts I've seen on using colors in data viz. I recommend it. I know lots of other people recommend it as well. It's gone into dark mode, but that's okay. So if you scroll through it, you'll be able to see just the extent to which she goes to equip people to use colors well. She talks about creating palettes. She talks about how to use colors for emphasis, etc., etc. I'll not scroll through the whole thing. It says on the side of it that it'll take you 73 minutes to read it. So that tells you a little bit about the amount of detail that's there, and definitely a blog post to bookmark and come back to when you're looking to enhance the colors in your visualizations. So we talked about picking colors, and we then want to try and manipulate them, because the colors that we're getting from the photos or from the images might be great as a starting point, but we might need to take things a little bit further. So to manipulate them, there are things that we can play with. We can play with the hue, which is essentially what color is it. We can play with saturation, which I understand is how colorful is it, so how red is the red. And value, which is to me how light is it. So you've got 3 things that you can play with. Lots of different ways of talking about colors. These ones work for me, so I hope that they will resonate with a few of you as well. We already did this a little bit. We talked about manipulating colors to signify different amounts. Here we played with the value or the transparency to indicate how much green banana was included in each of the bakes, and you all intuitively got the meaning of that. I've used it as well in times to show a cumulative effect. So this was a client who wanted to show the total bar at the top and then the breakdown into different groups underneath. They weren't working with penguin data. This was a mock-up, for those of you who recognize the penguin islands in the data set there. But it was just a way of exploring, okay, how can we show the total and make sure that it's understood as not being something that you need to add to the rest of it, and show the rest of it as cumulative to that total. The other thing that we can do is manipulate colors for recency effect. So if I ask you here which line represents the most recent data, you find yourself doing this thing again. So you're looking at the legend, you're looking at the plot. Oh, wait a minute, it was that one. Oh, wait, let's go back. So okay, so you've got numbers at the bottom, you've got numbers at the side, you've got 3 different colors, and yeah, and again, you're kind of doing this thing of trying to figure out what's what. If instead you do something like this, so here you've got going with a slightly lighter green as things fade into the past, it kind of gets a bit lighter. Or we could go for a less green, or as I've said to other clients, going grey. As things get older, they tend to go a little bit more grey. And so is that a way to think about the data? And if we combine the two, I think we sometimes get quite a powerful effect, that you've got the most recent data that's salient, that seems to be in the foreground, the rest of it fades behind it. And it can be quite a useful way of, again, avoiding that effect of having to look between the legend and the plot again, and to figure out what you're doing. Probably my main recommendation would be actually to add the year at the end here with a value that would help it make more sense. But if you're thinking about this in other contexts, it can be useful. You might also, for example, in this case, have 2 years that end up quite close together. You just wanted to highlight the most recent one. Having the others fade into the distance can be a useful kind of visual semantic, to avoid having to have too much text flying around the plot as well. Making colours work well together is a challenge that I really enjoy. It's good fun. But this was a project in which I was like, I do not know how to do this. So I was given 2 different logos. This is for the R Girls project, which teaches girls in schools to code. And it was being held at Green Oak Academy. So the R Girls logo is very pink. Green Oak Academy is green and brown. And I was just racking my brains thinking, how am I going to get this to work? The way that I got it to work was to try and think of an instance in nature where these colours co-occur. And so came across this photo, which I think is from the meadows in Edinburgh, when it's in spring and the blossom's out, and it's a really lovely place to hang out. So you've got this photo where you've got all the colours that are in the logo, and you can then figure out how to do it. And the unifying colour was actually this kind of purpley grey that I used to kind of bind everything together, and it did actually work. But the other thing that you can do is use one of the colours or a common colour, and add a little bit of that colour to the other ones. So I've got two young daughters, and one of the things that they enjoy doing is getting the paints out and painting stuff, and it gets really messy. But the stuff that they make is actually quite nice to look at, because it's so messy. You always get some colours that are blended in from somewhere else, and so you end up with like a splodge of colour. But it somehow it works because of the mess and because of the blending. It unifies the whole thing. So I'm going to introduce you to another resource, which is actually one that I made a few years ago. I created a package called Monochroma, and I created it initially with the intention of creating a monochrome color palette. So you could say, I want to use a purple color palette, go from a dark purple to a light purple, and I need 6 colors. And it does that. But actually, I ended up using it a lot more for blending colors together. And I said this is a no-code resources thing, and so I turned it into a Shiny app a few months ago for training that I did for a different group. So again, we've got the link here, and I'll just give you an example of what it does. Let me just copy that hex code because I'll use it in a minute. So as I said, a Shiny app, and I'll pop the resources for it. But thanks, Claudia. That's really kind. A comment that you've used monochrome before and you enjoy it. So what we can do, as I said, let's start with dark green color, and we can go lighter from that. and then it would give us that, and we could say, actually, sorry, I need 15 colors, and it will give you the number of colors that you need. You can say go darker instead, and it blends in some black color instead. Or you can say, actually, I want to blend with purple. And it will give you the number of colors that you need in order to do that, which is quite fun. The other way in which you can use it, you can kind of translate hex codes if you want to, and it gives you the red, green, and blue values that are there. But as I said, one of the ways that I end up using it a lot is to blend colors together. So here we're going to say our starting color is orange, and then I'm going to blend in this dark blue, which is the dark blue that's at the back of my slides. And you can blend in, a lot of it or not very much of it. And what I find this achieves is it gives you an orange that still looks orange, but that fits with the brand color that you're looking to work with. And then you can copy the hex codes that you get there. So let's do orange, let's do purple. I think purple, I felt it needed a bit more convincing because the purple was quite a strong color. And then we did some dark green as well. That needed a bit less convincing. And yeah, so I kind of played around with that. And the outcome, so here we've got the original colors, and here we've got the slightly blended ones, and it's really subtle, but these blended ones kind of work better with the dark blue background than the slightly more bold ones do. I'm getting a nod from Jocelyn, which I'm going to interpret as a good sign. So it's subtle, but it works. And this is a way that you can create a color palette that works with your brand identity, but that also does the semantics that we're talking about. So if the marketing department gets worried that you're not using your brand colors, no, I am. I'm just blending it in a little bit with the rest of them, and that can work quite well. Yeah, Emma's asking about accounting for different screen resolutions and different displays. It might change things. I actually had that problem at a conference recently. The bake-off plot that I showed with the bar graph, I created the color palette and it actually made my mouth water in creating it, which is really weird, but there we go. I think it was the rhubarb that did it, of all things. Such an English thing to say. Anyway, so the rhubarb did it, and then I stood up and gave the talk, and the way that it was displayed on the screen, it just didn't do it. It wasn't the same. Yeah, it's tricky, but I think what is it? I remember this thing. You're making me rack my brains for undergrad psychology stuff, but I think you can train a goldfish to tap a color at the bottom of a goldfish bowl in order to get some food, and then if you change the overall lighting in the room, like when you go through a tunnel and suddenly the stuff that's red doesn't look red anymore because the lights are green or whatever. You change the lighting, and I think that the goldfish can still do the task of hitting the right bit of the ball with its nose. So we are able to interpret colors relative to each other and relative to their context. So that probably helps a little bit in terms of how displays might change the color. If the difference between them stays the same, which hopefully it will, then that's helpful. But yeah, you're always at the mercy of technology in these things, but if we can try and get it to work right on the screen that you've got and on print, then that's definitely a step in the right direction. And actually this next section probably touches on this a bit as well, colors and accessibility. When we talk about accessibility, the first thing people say, oh yes, you should never use red and green. And it's about so much more than that. It's more than green and red, and actually you can choose different reds and different greens that work okay for people with different color blindness. There was a really helpful issue of the Nightingale magazine. Issue number 3 had a really big, strong section on accessibility and colours and accessibility in general in visualizations. And it's important to recognise that colour perception differences, some people struggle to see green, some people struggle to see red, some people struggle to see blue, some people struggle to see a combination of them. And for some people, it only comes up in certain contexts. I remember, a day where we were all sitting around the dinner table, and my brother looked at his carrot soup and said, this is really interesting. It doesn't look like it should taste like carrots. So we kind of all thought, okay, why? He said, well, because it's green. And this was the only instance in which we'd noticed that he he was perceiving a colour differently from the rest of us. And it only happened in certain hues of orange that somehow looked green to him, or that green and orange looked the same to him. So it was interesting to see, you know, the context in which it affects people. It's not quite the blanket perception of it that we sometimes have. And accessibility is also about neurodivergent audiences. You know, talking to people from a psychology background, I don't really need I'm preaching to the choir in a sense, but we know that this affects a lot of people in the global population, and it covers a lot of different things in terms of behavioural and emotional disorders, ADHD, learning disabilities, autism, and so on and so forth. Is there an intersection of colourblindness and neurodivergence? Adam, that is beyond my pay grade. You'll have to ask somebody with more of a background in that field. But yeah, I think it's just something that can affect people in different ways, and it's worth being aware of how we can use colours well to help not just people who struggle with colour perception per se, but neurodivergent audiences more broadly. And the case for designing with accessibility first is that it makes it better for everyone, really. It makes everything less visually overwhelming. You know, you all remember a website that you've logged onto and you think, oh my goodness, the colours are too much. I find it difficult. Now, if you are not, if you don't have any kind of neurodivergence, then imagine what it's like for people who would find that even more overwhelming than you. It just makes everything so much better to look at when we make it better with an accessibility mindset. It makes everything easier to read, whether it's that people have visual impairment or whether it's just that the text is written too small. You know, if you choose a font that is designed with accessibility properties in mind, it's going to make it easier to read for everybody. And it's also important in thinking about this to make the main thing the main thing, and we'll talk about visual hierarchy in text in just a minute. It also makes things more environment proof. So we've talked about, you know, the poor screen quality or the zoom pixelation. If we make sure that the colours are nice and distinct between each other, then that helps us get around that problem. You'll always have the colleague that insists on printing everything in black and white before they read anything, and they'll tell you that they can't read your graph. Actually, yeah, that is a fair point. And so we need to make sure that our graphs are still accessible. And as I mentioned, the projector quality that conferences and demos can come into play as well. So what are the recommendations? The recommendations when it comes to colours are to try to use shades of the same colour rather than lots of different colours. So rather than going for like a rainbow colour palette, instead think, okay, what's the main thing that you're trying to emphasise? And could you do that by just highlighting that thing with one colour and making the rest of it a kind of muted version, or doing the shades that we did earlier. The other recommendation for colour is to prefer muted colours over stark contrasts. So that's kind of what I was saying earlier about trying to avoid. Oh, interesting. There's a broken page. Okay, I'll make sure that the link is in the talk page. So this comes back. The muted colours thing comes back to what we were saying earlier about trying to not make it look like a playground logo. But it also makes everything much less visually overwhelming. And if you're blending in a bit of your brand colour with the colours that you're wanting to use, then you are essentially achieving muted colours in the first place, which is great. So the other things to do with accessibility are typography, visual hierarchy, and patterns. And we're limited in how much time. 2 hours is a long time, but we've already covered quite a lot already. We will talk about typography and visual hierarchy, and patterns is about making it predictable in terms of where you're supposed to be looking to make sense of what you've got. There's a quote here from the issue again about colours in our data visualization. So if you look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, then they talk about contrast ratios of the meaningful graphics to their background. So things need to stand out enough from the background to be easily visible by people. So the trouble is, if we're using a combination of colours, it's actually mathematically impossible to achieve high contrast between all of those and the background. So the compromise that we have is that we do the best that we can to make sure that colours are chosen with criteria in mind and that they're visibly distinct from each other for a range of different audiences. So that's the test that I always put my colour palettes through. It's, can I simulate the colour blindness tool on this and see what it looks like, and also, you know, get the tool itself to tell me if it thinks it's colourblind safe. Here are some of the simulations. So this is from a colour palette that I created for a client probably around this time last year, actually. You can see the original palette at the top and then the colour blindness simulations underneath it. And it's clear that the distinctive nature of the colours remains throughout the three different simulations that are there. Which makes it quite helpful. So here's what the package did. You take the penguin plot here, and then you add these 2 lines of code, and it applies the colours and does a bit of extra formatting to the plot as well, and just makes it look in line with their brand and just so much nicer than that, I think, anyway. So the tool that I use to do this is resource number 5. So this is the Chroma.js color palette helper, and again I've popped the link in there. And what I like about this tool, if it will load, which it may not, if it doesn't load, do not worry. The stuff is all there in the background. And actually, tell you what, let's just escape the thing and do that. Yeah, so what it allows you to do is, I'll go back to the dark green color that we used earlier, create color palettes and then check if they're colorblind safe. So this one tells me, no, this is not, probably because the darkness of the blue is too close to the darkness of the green. But you can then kind of try and change your color palette up and tweak it until you find something that looks quite nice, and you can often it's a bit of a game of figuring out how far can I push this before it tells me it's not safe again. And the other thing that I like about it is that you can check that it scales nicely if you've got your anchor colors in. You're all seeing this. Yeah, you're seeing the colors moving up and down. Yeah. So yeah, a good tool if you're looking to create color palettes, and if you're looking to interpolate between different colors and you say, right, these are my 3 brand colors and I know that I need 11 colors in my visualization, then you can do that using this tool. My top tip in creating a color palette that you need to scale across potentially an unknown number of colors is to go for dark and light contrast as well as variation in the hue or the color itself, and that should allow you to work with it. But what I like about that tool is that it gives you real-time feedback on whether your palette is going to work or not. So we're an hour in and all we've talked about is colors, and that's okay. That's because I feel like they are, once you get your colors right, it speeds up the rest of it, because it kind of relaxes how dependent you are on the text. It allows you to see more quickly what's going on in your plots, whether the story that you want to communicate is the one that you thought you were going to communicate, and whether, yeah, it just makes the rest of life a lot easier when it comes to data viz. So we've spent some time on colors, and now we're going to talk about choosing the right type of visualization, which we'll go through pretty quickly, mostly just to give you some vocabulary of stuff to Google. So if you see a visualization type that you like, I'm not going to tell you how to create it because you're all using different tools, but what you can do is Google, how do I make a B-swarm plot in Excel? And you will find a bunch of YouTube tutorials on how to do that. So yeah, grab a pen if something stands out here as a potentially useful tool for the story that you're looking to tell. So the first one that we've got is the humble bar graph, which we know and love and have used a lot. The first thing I would say about this is try to use colors wisely in your bar graph. So do not color, for example, here we've got the months here. Do not color every month a different color, just for the sake of making it pretty. Make sure that you're using colors that work well here. In this case, what did I do here? Oh yes, I went with dark green for Glasgow because it rains more in Glasgow than it does in Edinburgh. So I thought the green would help emphasize the greenness of that, and the green result of that. But it also starts with the same letter. So if you're stuck for a color, if your stuff is too abstract and you can't figure out which colours to pick, then picking a colour that starts with the same letter as the concept that you're depicting can be quite a helpful way of making that stick in people's minds as well. So we've got the colours there. The other thing that you might want to do is use colour to emphasise a particular point in the data. So rather than highlighting the difference between the two groups, you might want to say, oh, in the month of June, the two cities converge in how rainy it is. And that just puts things in a slightly different perspective. You know, you're wanting to use your data here to highlight a story. And if you were to just colour them as we had done in the previous one, you would spend quite a lot of text trying to point out to people that they need to look at the month of June. Whereas if you're using your colour to say, hey, look at the month of June, then that makes it a lot easier to do. And someone in the Q&A, Alexandra, you're asking where you can access the recording. I will make sure that it's on my website, and I'm sure Jocelyn can send out a wee message about that as well afterwards. The other thing that you can do with bar graph is consider flipping them on their side. Part of the reason for doing this sometimes is if you've got really long text that needs to fit in the axis. If you leave it like this and then you feel the need to put the text vertically, then people have to kind of spend a lot of time with the next to the side. It gets a bit sore. So make it easier for everybody. The other thing is to think, if you were to draw your graph on a piece of paper, you're in a cafe somewhere, you want to explain something to another researcher really quickly, how would you draw it on a napkin? If you're thinking about things that normally go from left to right, then maybe think about plotting it in such a way that it goes from left to right. So things like duration or the time spent doing something. You also want to make sure that you're ordering things sensibly. So here, I would probably reverse the order. We've got January at the bottom and December at the top, which doesn't feel particularly intuitive to me. But it makes sense to order it logically in terms of the y-axis here. Equally, if you're wanting to show the rank, so say you're looking to highlight instead the rainiest month on average, then you would probably want to order it by how much rain there is in each month, and then you would see that cascading through the graph. So again, think about the story that you're trying to tell and what you're trying to emphasize, and you can do quite a lot to make a bar graph so much better than the default that you would maybe sometimes get. Now, the bar graph has a number of foodie friends that all fulfill the same purpose. And so I thought I would just run through the bar graph, options for the bar graph, and then a bunch of its friends. So you've got the stacked bar, which I only recommend using if the sum of the stack makes sense. So here, the sum would be the total amount of rain that falls across Edinburgh and Glasgow, which you can kind of stretch to make sense. But yeah, don't stack things together that don't belong together. You could also consider using diverging bar graphs. So these are useful when you want to see both the total length of the bar, but also whether the bar is mostly on the left or mostly on the right. And it also makes it a lot easier to compare the differences between months within one city. So if we go back to the stacked bar, it's actually quite difficult to compare the difference between April and May in Edinburgh because it's shifted by the amount that it rained in Glasgow. Whereas if we put it here in a diverging bar, you can see much more easily that it rained more in April than it did in May. So again, have a think about that for your own research. Is a diverging bar something that you should be thinking about? Possibly. Someone suggested that this looked like a stack of pancakes. Maybe that adds it to the food category. The next one is the lollipop. It's essentially a bar graph, but instead of having a bar, you've got a dot and a line that joins it to the axis. And this, I think, can be particularly useful if you're looking to show how much something diverges from a baseline. So here I've just put a line here that's the mean amount of rain in a given month. And then you can see the months that are drier or wetter, depending on which side of it they fall. What application am I using to create the graphs? I'm using R. These are all created in R. And yeah, happy to share the code from these if that would be helpful to anyone. The other one that you can think about is the dumbbell chart. So this is the fitness enthusiast to make up for all the food in the rest of this group. Dumbbells are quite good for focusing on the difference. And here you'll see a wee subtlety that I've changed the colour of the bar according to which direction it's going in. Again, something to think about, and another graph type to Google. Pie charts, we all know pie charts. It's essentially a stacked bar that goes around in a circle. That's all it is. So if you're looking to create these in R, when I first started using R, it took me a while to figure it out, but yeah, that's all it is. It's a bar, and then you add coord polar to it, and it turns it into a pie. Donuts, same thing, just a bit more trendy. So all we're doing with this one is we're creating some space in the middle by changing the axis limits. But yeah, these can be quite fun if you want to put annotations in the middle to highlight the proportion that's going on here. I would like to introduce the concept of a croissant plot, but it's a gauge chart or an arc. But if we could make the effort to make the term croissant stick, I think that would be much appreciated within the data viz community. And waffles, of course, waffles. So we've got the waffle chart. Again, these are all showing the same information, and you can have the waffle as is, or you can have it proportional. Now, I quite like waffle charts, and I know some people find them difficult to interpret, but I think a waffle where it's clearly a percentage, so you've got 10 by 10. To me, this helps. You can see quite easily that that's 5 out of 100, because we're quite good at counting in multiples of 10. And this does the same thing as a pie chart, but I feel with more interpretability. So you lose some of the precision. So if somebody's really keen that it should be able to show 5.2%, you can't show 5.2%, but you will probably be able to see that this is 5% rather than 7%. Whereas if you ask somebody to look at a pie chart and tell you whether it's 5% or 7%, they will probably struggle to do that. So it adds a little bit of interpretability to what is a proportion representation. So that the humble bar graph and its foodie friends, there's a couple of do's and don'ts. So do not use it for means and summary statistics. Shock horror, we do that all the time in psychology. We do. And it's okay. We all make mistakes, and it's all about making baby steps in the right direction. But I'll show you why in just a minute. Do try to avoid using this where the gap between the 0 and the top of the bar is less relevant as well. And it could be stuff where there's not actually a meaningful 0, and avoid using bar charts in that context. And if actually the main thing to show is how things vary towards the top of that bar, then having all the space filled in underneath it is adding a lot of visual information there that's not actually relevant to the interpretation. And try to avoid this when you want to compare change over time between groups. Again, we've all been guilty of that, and we've all seen the bar graphs where you've got 20 different bars that you're supposed to be looking at, and they're all clustered by 4, and you're just spending all your time doing exactly what that kitten's doing in that moving image that you're looking to try and track. Wait a minute, is that bigger than that? But then it's smaller over here. There are better ways of doing that. Do use it for comparing totals and percentages, and that's okay. And they can be to look at things across categories, groups, places, conditions, etc. You can use it for Likert scale proportions, but again, consider maybe using a diverging bar. So you've got the negatives to one side and the positives to the other side, and that will help with interpretation. And bar graphs are, people are used to seeing bar graphs. So if you need a low effort on your reader's part, then a bar graph is not a bad thing to go for, but avoid it for means. And there are other ways to do that, which we'll come back to. So that's it with the bar graph and its foodie friends. Here we've got a series of graphs that are quite good for showing changes over time. So if you want to show changes over time and you want to emphasize values, then I would suggest a line plot with dots over the top of it. And that just kind of brings out the story that you need. If instead you want to emphasize the trajectory and you want to show the detail, then maybe having a smooth line and all the raw data behind it is a better approach to doing that. Again, this is all just rain data between Edinburgh and Glasgow. Good to play on that rivalry every now and then. If you want to use a stack, that's okay, but the same rule applies as with the stacked bars. Do only stack things together where the total makes sense. And the stack can be quite useful for allowing you to see the total amount of rain that's fallen, for example, and you can follow that quite nicely with the grids in the background. And this is a stream graph, much more difficult to see the total, but here what you see is the relative proportion. And yeah, it's a fun graph, isn't it? Everybody likes a stream graph. It just looks a bit different. The peer reviewers might push back, but it's fun. It shows something a bit different, emphasizes a different story, and there are things that you can do to kind of smooth it out more or less as it goes. The other thing that's quite fun to consider in looking at changes over time is whether you should actually focus on snapshots. So if you look, here, for example, we're looking at how much it rained, say in 2015 and 2023. And if your story is about the difference between the two, then there's a lot of extra noise going on here that's not that relevant to the story. If instead you pick out just those 2 years that you're looking to focus on, and then you can see much more clearly the difference that's gone on over time within that. Again, pick your stories, make sure it's relevant to the story that you're telling. But if you're looking to show change between 2 snapshots, then a slope chart, slope graph can be quite a useful way of doing that. I like a bump plot, but they can be a bit more difficult to interpret, but this shows you rank over time. So here we've got more rain and less rain. And this was an example in which, having sorted out my colors at the start, allowed me to very quickly check that I'd got the more rain and the less rain the right way around, because I wasn't looking at it thinking, well, which one's pink again and which one's turquoise. I was thinking, yeah, green is Glasgow. Okay, so I can go and check. Green is Glasgow. Yes, there was more rain in Glasgow in 2022. It's useful to do that. So this is a bump plot, generally used to show the rank. I used a bump plot for fun to map the relationships within the band Fleetwood Mac a few years ago. It was lots of stuff happened. And you've got the people who started the band, and then the people who left, people who went solo for a bit, who came back to it, people who didn't last particularly a long time, and then who was together for which periods of time. So this is an unorthodox use of a bump chart, but it allows me a good segue into talking about relationships and the way that we can plot relationships. So scatter plots, useful for creating comparisons between from like to like. So here, the amount of rain in Edinburgh compared to the amount of rain in Glasgow within the same month and the same year. In previous examples, we were looking at the flipper lengths and bill lengths of penguins, and each dot was a penguin with 2 data points about it, just to show the relationship there. So scatterplots comparing like to like, you could consider adding a trend line to that if you want to. And again, you would need to Google which type of trend line you want to use and what equation you need in order to do that. But most data viz software will have options that you can play around with that to make sure that it's both statistically accurate and visually compelling for the people that need to read it. Tree maps I've kind of shoehorned a little bit into the relationships category, but mostly because they allow you to see both hierarchy and values, and so you can see how things group together, as well as seeing how things change within that group. And forest plots are good for showing the relationship between different conditions or between the effect and the baseline. This is one that I created for a client who's just had their paper published, which is really exciting. It was quite a lengthy peer review process that they had to go to, but they were looking at ratings of news videos depending on whether it had been made entirely by a human. So the human made baseline, for which I picked a kind of what I thought was like a brain color, kind of that orangey pink, entirely made by artificially by a robot or by AI, for which I used a kind of steely blue of the cold computers, or a combination of the two. And so it's quite nice that we intuitively know that between pink and blue we find purple. So that makes it easier to remember what's what when we're looking at it. There is a legend sitting underneath the plot somewhere. But the other things that I've done here, as well as the colours, is a bit of text hierarchy, which we'll come to in just a minute. I've added a clear baseline into this because forest plots are confusing. Most people don't know how to read a forest plot. So specifying exactly what that line is helps you then make sense of the differences between the points and the line. I've put all the text in helpful places to reduce eye movement, and we've made sure that you're looking at the right end of the scale to look at the values. If you put all the text at this side, then you have to keep jumping backwards and forwards between it. So we put the text either side, the values in the right place, the right colors, bit of text hierarchy, etc. This was actually originally 2 plots that they'd created in Excel, and you had a column of what the questions were, a column of p-values, a column of error bars, a column of the means, then the visual representation, then a bunch of extra stuff. So putting it all in a much more compact form, I think, helps us to process it, even though it's busy. I think it's more helpful doing it that way. The last category before we start talking about text is maps. Maps can look like maps, and this is a choropleth map, which is a map that we're used to seeing. Maps with points can be quite fun. This is one that I made for my dad's retirement, actually, to celebrate all the places where he had done a concert. He's a musician. And I've made it in dark mode because I wanted the concerts to be, a source of hope and light in the places where he'd been. And it was quite fun looking at this. But the fun thing with maps is that, essentially you're just playing with coordinates, which are points in an XY grid. And then you can add different points to them. I also quite like creating maps with just points. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out what it's depicting. But particularly if you have a country with a really clear shape to it that's quite recognizable, then this can be quite an interesting way of making other points about what's going on. This is one I created about towns that contain keywords from the Constitution in the town names, and I was struck by the fact that there was no town with the word posterity in its name, which was an observation to make. You can also look at hex bin maps, so that's the term to look up if you like the look of this. These work quite well if your country has a visually distinct shape. A lot of countries do not. The UK does, the United States does, but if the country that you're trying to depict is more of a round shape that could be a bunch of other different round shapes, then it might be more tricky to do that. But again, if your audience is clear on what you're representing, this can work really well. I've seen this done with rectangles instead of kind of hexes, which is good. But yeah, Google hex bin map, and you'll find a bunch of different options on how to do that. Or something in between. This one was made intentionally to look like Lego, which is quite fun. And I think it was created in R. Yeah, it was. So it's on the R Graph Gallery, and I've popped the link there as well, if anyone wants to revisit that. So choosing the right type of visualization, it's about thinking, what's the purpose of the plot? What would be missing if it wasn't there? It's quite a good way of getting to what the purpose is. What do the readers need to be able to get from it instantly? What can you put behind the cursor? So what's the main thing that they need to be able to see? And are there any things that you could put into interactivity? So this is where thinking about if you're creating dashboards, don't put all the values on there. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should, because people will then spend all their time reading. So figure out what needs to stand out, and then what could you put as extra exploration. And also worth considering, would more plots here be a good idea? So if you have lots of different categories with some overarching ones, you may want to have small multiples. So you could map, create the same plot for different regions, or create the same plot for different groups, rather than trying to put everything within the same plot. And if there are different things that people need to know about the data, then you might need to have some different plot types. So you could combine, say, a waffle with a scatter plot with an area graph. And that would allow you to bring out the different stories in the data that you've been exploring. I talked about not using means, not using bar graphs when you're showing means or summary statistics. This is the data from the Datasaurus dozen, which I made into a really cheesy Jurassic Park-esque graph a few years ago. It's ugly, but it will make it stick in your minds. Okay, so do not, there is something to be said for just plotting the raw data. You get to see so much more of what's going on. And there are ways that you can do it to organize it and to make it not too visually overwhelming. But for each of these, this dozen of data sets, the mean, the standard deviation, and the correlation between X and Y are basically indistinguishable. And yet they look quite different. So if we're creating plots that just capture the summary statistics, we're losing quite a lot of the richness of the data, and potentially presenting a misleading story, which is why we want to avoid bar graphs if they're not appropriate for what we're trying to do. There are different ways of getting around that, and some people think that as long as you've got the mean, or maybe this is the median, and is that the edges? Is that the interquartile range? What's the length of the bars? So box plots are difficult. People don't know how to interpret box plots, and even people who make box plots don't know how to interpret box plots a lot of the time. What do we do with the outliers? And then if you look at these three boxes, they look pretty similar, right? So you would be justified in thinking that the distribution of data in each of these is the same. This is one of my favorite types of plots. It's a B-swarm plot, and this is showing the same data. And just doing this, it just opens up a whole bunch of things, right? So we can see that the distribution is actually quite different. That what was highlighted in the previous plot as being, some kind of extreme outlier is actually not that far off the rest of what's going on, just a bit of a continuation of the spread. That what looked like three very similar boxes actually look like quite different distributions. Here we've got a good cluster around, some kind of central point. Here we seem to have a bit of a cluster down here. Here we've got a cluster towards the top. And so plotting the raw data just allows you to bring out so much more information. I found this type of plot particularly useful when looking at stuff where you've got different dimensions to your data. And so you could say, okay, this is the penguin data, but let's imagine that this is three groups in your experiment, three different types of participants, and maybe they've come from three different schools, okay, and you're plotting scores on some kind of test that you're writing. You could then play around with the colors so that you would be able to show different stories. So say if you wanted to plot, you've got the three different schools and you've got candidates that come from area B and area A, you could color them by area B and area A, and actually you would show that across the three schools, those who come from the same area perform in the same way. It just happens to be that these candidates are all from the same area, so it's not actually a school effect. There's ways in which you can use the plots to explore your data, but also to help people understand interactions between different variables that are going on. If you try to do that just with summary statistics, it gets really confusing. Whereas showing people the raw data, I found personally, helps them get to the story much quicker. So the resources 6 and 7 are two resources that have been put together by people who've collected a bunch of different plots and a bunch of different ways to use them. So the first one is the database catalog by Severino Rebecca, which is a brilliant resource. So here you can search, you can just have a look around and think, oh, actually I quite fancy figuring out how to make a heat map, and you go and you have a look at that. Where's the back button? Lost it, that's fine. Or the other option is to search by function and say, actually, what I really want to do here is look at part to whole. So what are my options for looking at part to whole? Okay, I've got these different options here. And let's say, oh yes, I like these ones. So let's say you want to create this kind of plot. What he's done there is he's then gathered up a bunch of code-based resources that you can use, but also no-code options. And so you can go into these and type in your data, and it will create the plots that you're interested in creating. So really, really good resource to have a look at. And for those of you who are more interested in the code side of things, datadiviz.com by Jan Holtz is a brilliant resource, again, showing you how to do stuff in R, in Python, and in D3. D3 is on my list of stuff that I want to explore this year, and so I will be coming back to this resource to see what I can do. Again, similar kind of approach that you can explore. Okay, I've got numerical and categorical data. Let's say I want to create a sunburst plot. Okay, how do I go about that? And then you've got stuff on D3 and stuff in the R graph gallery as well that you can follow through and have a look at how you can do that. So some really great resources out there to give you inspiration for the types of plots that you might want to create, and also point you to where you can make them. So we've done colors, we've done types of viz. The last thing I want to talk about is text, because text is underrated as something that has a big impact on your visualizations. We're among psychology folks, so can anyone tell me what this is referencing? What effect? What name is associated with this effect? Is anyone going to get there? Stroop. Yes, Estelle, well done. Stroop. This is the Stroop effect. So the Stroop effect says, basically, we read text. Okay, so if you present text to somebody, they will spend their time reading it. So it's really difficult. If you ask people what color it is and it says pink, people will say pink rather than being able to say blue, because they're just reading out the color name that's written there rather than being able to tell you the color. So where does this apply in our visualizations? If you put text in your visualizations, people will spend time reading it. And so we need to optimize the text, partly by making sure we don't put text in there that's unnecessary, but also by guiding them as to what's most important to focus on. So tip number 1, reduce reliance on text. We've done that already by picking colors that we think are semantically relevant, which gets us from this to this. We don't need the legend. We didn't need it in the first place anyway, to be honest, because it was redundant with the colours of the bars, but it's made it so much easier to remember which bar represents which. And I'm no longer reading the text on the axis because the colours are telling me what I need to know. The next thing that you want to do is improve text hierarchy, and that's easier to demonstrate than it is to explain. But if you look at this image, you'll see that you're looking at some text that grabs your attention, and other text you can just come back to at a later stage. As data viz creators, we need to harness this so that people are drawn to the text that we think is most important, and then they can come back to stuff later if they want to revisit it. So that gets us from this to this. It's subtle, and this is subtle enough that it could work in an academic paper, but the title is a little bit bigger on this side, and I've also made it slightly darker than the rest of the text, and it's just a little bit easier to read what's going on there. The next thing to do is to think about adding some personality. We all know what the default Excel Calibri looks like. This is the default ggplot, which I think is Helvetica. Yeah, give it some personality. So find a font that you feel reflects something of you, something of the project, or your brand. If you've got strong brand guidelines, again, go back to those and use them. If you go back to the Data Wrapper blog, there's a brilliant blog post on there about choosing text for data viz specifically. You want to choose a font that's neither too wide, so it takes you a long time to read the text, nor too narrow, and you can't really see the difference between them. So it's a bit of a tricky balance to strike. But you need to do this without compromising on accessibility. So if you're choosing a font, there are a few things to look out for. One is, do these three letters look distinct enough from each other? C, E, and O. The other is you're looking for a font where Q, P, and B and D are not perfect symmetries of each other. You also want I, 1, and L to look distinct from each other, which my font kind of fails to do. And also consider how your numbers are. So if your numbers are jumping up and down, horizontally, no, vertically. Anyway, you've written them horizontally and they're jumping around vertically. Probably try and avoid that. And it's worth considering whether a monospaced font would be better for presenting numbers as well. I'll point you to some further resources to explore that. My go-to for font inspiration is Pimp My Type. It's Oliver Schundorfer. Again, a really good website with lots of stuff on YouTube, lots of articles that are good to look at, and a newsletter, which is one of the few ones that I actually read, which every week suggests a new font. He's got some great stuff on creating fonts for UI, in the context of UI, for creating interfaces that people are going to use, which I think are really relevant for data visualization. You want your text to be functional and readable, and especially when numbers are involved. He's got some good suggestions on that as well. And the next thing we're going to do with the text is to reduce unnecessary eye movement. So that gets us from this side to this side. So here I've just put the labels at the end of the bars, added the values in, and everything is just where I need it to be in order to read the plot in a straightforward way. If you're going to do that, you want to check the contrast of the colour with its background. And I only really learnt recently that black on red does not work for a lot of people, and that fails all the accessibility tests. So don't put black on red. But colour contrast checker is a great tool for doing all of that. And I like the fact that you can kind of play around with it until it shows you what passes and what fails. It's a good tool. And it avoids you having to remember all of the guidelines, because it kind of tells you whether you've passed or failed on the contrast ratios for the size of text that you're needing. So again, it's resource number 9. You're looking at the clock and thinking, just got half an hour to go. Are we going to make it to 12? We will. And there should be time for some questions and answers as well. With your text, you also want to think about giving stuff some space to breathe. We want to think about manipulating line heights, margins, and just remember that space is important. That the white space frames everything else and allows you to see what's going on more there. difference between these two plots is probably quite difficult to see. If I put the blue background back on, then you can see that there's a little bit more space around the edge of the plot. I would probably even add more than that. It's one of the things that I find most of my clients hesitate to do. They feel that they need to maximize the space that's taken up inside the graph, but actually having a bit of a margin can be quite helpful. And a top tip from one of my graphic design friends is to use multiples. So make the margin a multiple of the main text size that you're using. Again, it just saves you so much soul searching and thinking, oh, should the margin be 5 or 6 points, or should I go with maybe 11? No, just go with a multiple of the main text size, and that will help. And the more you can get away with, the better. So we've given everything some space to breathe. There's so much more to talk about with text, but obviously our time is limited. I gave a talk at the Shiny in Production conference in October last year, and that was recorded, so you can have a look at that if you want to explore that more. If you're creating stuff in R, that was all done in R, so you get all the code for how to do that, as well as stuff for troubleshooting font issues, which Jocelyn and I had a huge amount of fun doing when we were working on that project together, because we were using custom fonts, and R was not playing ball until we figured out exactly what was going on. So that was useful learning that I have then communicated to everybody that I interact with about fonts. And the last section, really, just as we wrap up, is about making your life easier when you're creating these things. So shameless plug here is that I make bespoke packages that do this for people. So you take the plot, you feed it two extra lines of code, and it transforms it into something that's pretty much ready to go. Yeah, I really enjoy doing that. And if you want to chat about that, then that's great. The other thing that I enjoy doing is creating parameterized plot functions, and I'm giving a talk about that at the R Medicine conference on Friday. So if you're going to be there, I will see you there, and it'll be different from this. And if you're not there, I will also post that on my website, and you can catch up if that's something that you're interested in. Resource number 11, I must have skipped a number somewhere. I'll go back and check that before I publish the slides. Figma, for those of you who have come across Figma before, you'll know what it does. Those of you who haven't, it's an intuitive online platform for creating visual things. It can't load because let's copy the link. Just wanted to demonstrate what we can do with this. So Figma is free, so anyone can use it. And one of the things that you can do within it is create some styles. So say we'll just create another slide. Oh, there we go. I can go there. And we'll add a wee text box in. Okay, and it's automatically styled it, giving it the title style that I created before logging on. I could say, actually, no, sorry, I want that to be the subtitle instead, and it will change it to the font, so I don't have to remember what fonts sit where. I've got the styles created, and I can also create a new style if I want to. Where are the styles? Somewhere. The styles are somewhere. The tutorial that I've linked shows you how to do that. But I think the thing that I wanted to show that's quite fun is that you can manipulate stuff as you go. So you can say, actually, I've created all of this, but I've decided I just don't like that title font anymore. And so instead, I'm going to manipulate that, and I'm going to change it so that the title is Enriqueta, and it changes it. You see, it changed it across the two slides. So this kind of automates the formatting of stuff for you, so that you can just say, I want all my titles to look like this, and then if you change your mind, they can just look like what they used to look like. And it should go back. And the same happens with colors. So I've said, okay, we're going to use this blue, and we're going to assign that color, and then let's just create another rectangle up here, and for the fill, we're going to say, make that one the gold color that I've created within the Figma styles. And if at any point you decide, actually, I just don't really like that one, let's just change that to something a bit different, then that's changed it, but it's less obvious. Where has that gone? Yeah, so you can kind of make stuff move around in a way that is easier to do than if you were trying to code stuff all from scratch. And again, it doesn't recognize that color because I did a typo, but you can see that it changed all three of those colors within that. So Figma styles, something to think about if you want to create your visuals and then do a bit of extra fun stuff with them. Can be quite a useful tip. And the last resource is probably the one that you didn't expect, which is Excel. So you can do quite a lot with Excel. And there are some guides out there on how to create your own templates and make sure that they come through all the time. But I'll not go into the details of how to do that. You can look at it. But the long and short of it is that you then end up with your own color palette coming up as the first one, which then means that you can choose your colors from that, so that when you create a plot, it defaults to using those colors for you. And you can do the same thing with your text styles, and you can say a title looks like this, a subtitle looks like this, and again, every new plot that you create, you can apply that style to it. So have a look again at the links that I'll share on the main page for this, and that will show you how to do that to make your life a little bit easier and to basically speed up that process of getting from the data to a visualization that you're happy to see published out there in the wild. So that's it. We made it. We've covered a lot of ground, and I'm aware I've thrown a lot of information at you. But at this point, it's over to you. We've got some time for questions and answers, which I'll let Jocelyn guide us through. My email address is there, and as is the link to my talks page, where I'll upload the title for this talk and the resources that we've covered, and I'll also make sure that the recording's on there once that's been released. The R in the middle of my name, Cara R. Thompson, is my middle initial, but people miss it in the domain name. So that's just highlighting that that's there. So yeah, if you get stuck on anything, do give me a shout. I've also put together a quick feedback form. If you would like to give me any feedback on this, I'd really like to read that so that I can improve the stuff that I do for future groups, and also just see what the highlight was for you today. That would be great. So I popped a link in the chat just there.